So this is a fun interview with Hayden Paul from the Stick of Joseph and his wife, Savannah, who are a young married couple with kids. We talk about family. We talk about the direction of our culture and how you're going to bring up kids in an increasingly difficult environment. They both articulate their ideas very well. I think you'll really enjoy this. I also want to reintroduce a new brand partner, and that is Fathom the Good. They have an incredible homeschooling curriculum for teens based on the question of the good. It digs deep into philosophy, the founding of America. And as you can see here on the homepage, helps teens resist radical ideas with timeless truth. As I scroll down here you'll see that it's very immersive, lots of videos, lots of interactive questions. And one of the things that I absolutely love about Fathom the Good is how it helps teens learn to think critically. It helps them to navigate a radical world and instills in them the ability to build confidence and resilience as teenagers. This curriculum comes from my good friend Ralph Hancock, BYU professor of political philosophy. You're going to love this. Go to fathomthegood.com. Again, that's fathomthegood.com. You're going to hear a lot about them. Here we go. All right, welcome to Cwic Show. My name is Greg Mattson, and I am your host. In this episode, we have brought on Hayden Paul from the Stick of Joseph and his wife, Savannah. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you. We're excited to be here.
So we're going to talk a little bit about gender roles. We're going to talk about family. We're going to talk about the craziness that's going on in the world right now. I know that you guys had seen an episode I did recently that was on the male in the St. George area who was on the loose, had killed his parents, and then everyone was looking for a woman. It was a very strange thing. We have this breakdown of gender. We've got this breakdown of really to the point of biology and sex. How do you guys, as a fairly new married couple, wander through this wilderness, this craziness that we are living today?
Well, I think first and foremost, we abide by the Family Proclamation to the world. And it's something that has become controversial, obviously, but we read that document, and to us, that is inspired, revelatory scripture. And so to us, the hard part is, how are we going to teach our children to live in a world that completely disregards the Family Proclamation of the world? To us, it kind of seems commonsensical. But that said, we are influenced ourselves, and we've realized that as we've been married and as we've tried to find roles, that even we have been influenced by this world, and we're like having to step back and be like, wait a second, what am I saying? Why are we saying this? It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, there comes a point where you have to decide, am I going to be trendy or am I going to follow truth? Because they're never going to be the same thing. And so as parents, you can definitely say we're not experienced parents. We have 2 kids, 3 and 18 months, and I'm pregnant with our 3rd right now. So we have been parents for 3 years. And even now we're thinking about like preschool, and eventually our kids will grow up and be educated by other people rather than just us as their parents. Maybe if that's if we decide to. But there is so much in the world that is going to teach our kids something. And so we're like, okay, what do we believe? What do we want to teach our children? What is truth? What comes from God? And so that's just something that we've had to have a lot of.
Well, let me back up a little bit for both of you. So you guys are in your 20s still, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So growing up, you started to get some of this craziness, right? You're going, there's always been issues. There's always been sin. But, back in my day, all the way back in my day, we had these traditional sins of sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Yeah.
It's like, that's what you dealt with. Right. And now there's like this crazy Pandora's box that's been opened up, and there's so many other issues to deal with. How did you get to a point where you're at now, where you're like, okay, well, we're already in the mold, getting married here, of what we want with a family that is in line, say, with the Proclamation on the Family?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like, first off, one thing I do want to say that I think is an important difference between your era of growing up and kind of our era in our 20s is that sex, drug, and rock and roll was never like this. It was never presented as virtuous necessarily. It was always rebellious, right? But it was like, be a rebel. The problem with it now is that all of these things that are confusing are presented as virtuous, that are completely undermining the natural order that God has set up and the roles that God has given both men and women. And that's what makes it so difficult, and I think a lot of it plays on feminine sensibilities. For example, Savannah and I have had many conversations, and I think one thing, and correct me if I'm wrong, babe, but I think
I will.
that there have been times where you found yourself saying things because it felt right, because it's presented as like being kind and virtuous, and then you kind of look back and you're like, oh, maybe that isn't what I want to believe. Is that true?
Yeah, I'd say that's probably true. Give me an example.
An example, I don't even know. Like it's really hard, and I don't want to get us in too much trouble on the internet. But we've had a lot of hard conversations, specifically maybe when it comes to gender roles.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
As we've tried to figure out, and you don't really have to figure out gender roles when you don't have kids. Because it's like both of you can have a job, you can go out, you can make money, whatever. But the second you have this child that you are in charge of, you have to start dividing and conquering. And that's where I think we had a lot of conversations, and I think you had kind of a big mind change on how we should handle those gender roles. Do you want to talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I had a huge mindset shift. I was raised in a very traditional family. We had 6 kids. We all are still active in the church. My dad was a stake president. And so it was in Illinois, so it was a little different church culture than where we are now in Utah. But for the most part, I feel like watching my mom be a stay-at-home mom, that was something that I wanted to do. And it is still. So I am a stay-at-home mom, and I love being a stay-at-home mom. There have been things, I don't even know how to put this. Things that I've had to change my mind on. I think maybe I, at some point, had been a little bit influenced by the worldview of like what is feminism and what is the gender roles, but also go be a powerful woman, go be a boss babe, go be whatever.
Girl power.
Girl power, exactly. And I never got to the point of like, oh, I don't need a man, because I always wanted to get married and have kids. Like that's always been important to me, thankfully. But there have been times where I've had to kind of take a step back and say, what is the world trying to teach me about this, about my role as a woman, about more than just my role, but about my femininity? Like, what does feminism actually mean? And I've had to take a little bit of a step back and say, well, what does God say about femininity? And what is divine femininity? And what is that, like, what inherent gifts have I been given as a woman from God that he wants me to use in my family? I hesitate to really break things up super, super black and white, because I think that the way that any woman can fulfill her feminine role and any man can fulfill his divine role or his divine masculine role is by counseling with God and figuring out exactly what it is that God wants you to be doing. I do also believe that there are inherent gifts that we've been given as women, inherent gifts that you've been given as men, that need to be cultivated on purpose. And the world is so against those things. Toxic masculinity and this stuff is just so harmful and so dangerous. And that's what Hayden was saying at the beginning about like all these other damaging things, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, were promoted as bad. But these things are promoted as truth. And so we have to really up our game when it comes to discernment to figure out not just what is the world telling me, not even just what is church culture telling me, but what is God telling me about my divine role as a woman or as a man.
And one thing I will say, a specific example is, there's a period of time where Savannah and I were struggling really hard financially. It actually had to do with doing the Stick of Joseph stuff.
It was not very long ago.
It wasn't very long ago. And, we were really struggling trying to make ends meet. And so Savannah was like, okay, I'm going to help pick up the slack. But
yeah.
at the same time, we had these 2 children, and it became this overwhelming thing. And I remember I came home from a business trip, and we sat down on the couch, and she looked me in the eyes, and she's like, Hayden, I feel like I've been trying to fulfill your masculine role of providing, like, because we're in this hard spot right now, but I'm not going to do that anymore. I trust that you are going to provide, and I am going to nurture our children. And that it was such a beautiful moment, because on one end I felt respected and trusted, and I was like, all right, I really gotta step it up. And
it's almost inspiring.
Yes, it was
right
inspiring.
to say
like,
to be given
me to do this.
Yeah, to be given that stewardship and an approval of that. It's inspiring. I think sometimes maybe on both sides, from both sexes, right, we may not always understand that, and where you can give a woman the ability to be more feminine, and you can give the man more ability to be more masculine, instead of trying to cross over and make up those things, right?
Yeah.
Well, and if it was the opposite direction, if Hayden came to me and said, I want you to stay home and be the mother to our children, like, the internet would freak out. I would be so oppressed, right? But in reality, that's what I want. At my core, without all the distractions and all the people telling me, like, I need to go make money, I need to go be successful in the world. Not that those things are bad, right? And there are plenty of working women, especially in the church, because that's what God's plan is for them at this stage in their life and for their family. And that's why I hesitate, like I said, to get really black and white on these. But for us, God had sat me down and was like, stop. Like, stop trying to do all these little side hustles and all these things that are distracting you from your kids, because this time is the time and season in your life where I want you to be mom. And I want you to get good at meal planning, and I want you to get good at, creating systems around the house that now make my life easier as a mom of almost 3, right? And that at that season, God told me what I needed to be doing. And I was able to then put that trust financially and spiritually into my husband. And all along, that's what he wanted. Even though it was stressful, even though it's hard, the role that he wanted as father and husband, deep down at his core, was the role to provide and to preside and to protect. And so I almost gave him permission to do that, and gave myself the permission to fulfill the feminine roles that I knew God wanted me to fulfill at that time. And so, like I said, if it was backwards, if he was coming to me and saying that, the world would have a fit. But I would say, thank you. That's what I want. I want to be a mom right now. I want to, these are the roles that I want to fulfill.
Yeah. It's interesting. So my wife was a stay-at-home mom, right, for most of the time. Early on in the salad days, right, we had, she would work a little bit on the side and had a job. But once our first child was born, that was it. Right, for us. Now, here and there, where there was some financial stresses, then she would get a part-time job for a little bit, or do whatever she could, and et cetera. But it is against what the world wants. That's completely against what the world wants, and it's interesting because you talk about like feminism, and feminism is, well, choice, but at its core, it's really not. It's
not at all.
Right. It's we want you following this over here.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's very difficult to go against the grain like that. And it's just getting stronger and stronger. Right. You have fewer and fewer. You have fewer and fewer marriages. You have fewer and fewer children that have a father in the home. Right, because the mother can do it all, right? I'll do it all, and I don't need the man, right? And you have more and more daycare. You have, not that any of these things are specifically bad, and people get put into difficult situations all the time. But, I'm listening to the presidential debate last night, and there's this big, huge deal on childcare. And it is an issue for people, right? It is an issue. How do you take care of childcare? But the further we go down the road of leaving the kids to someone else to educate them and to bring them up socially and emotionally and every other way, that will always become a bigger issue. And then it just cycles, right? It just gets worse and worse. So I think going against the grain on that is going to be harder and harder for your generation, right? It's going to be very difficult for you to stay true to those roles and then instill them in your kids.
Mm-hmm.
Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so last night I was up with some youth at Flaming Gorge in our ward because I'm a teacher's quorum advisor, but it was like young men, young women. We had about 35 youth up there. It was awesome. And I shared something with I was pretty fired up just because I see so much that is going against these children, these youth. I feel so bad for them, and I just like it fires me up. But I told them, I said, the world is lying to you right now, saying that the best thing that you can accomplish is out in the world, making money, making moves, building businesses, that for you as a woman, the best thing you can do is shake your booty on TikTok and get as many guys as possible. And the best thing you can do as a guy is make a ton of money so that way you can, have a different girl every night. Those are the messages from the world. And the other message from the world is that children get in the way of doing what you want, which is true. But I just try to instill it in them that the most important thing, like when I come home every single day from work and my two children run up to me and look in my eyes and say, "Daddy," I could lose my whole reputation. We could be living out in a tent somewhere. I hope this doesn't happen. We could be living out in a tent somewhere, and as long as my children love me, respect me, as long as I love my children, and I love my wife, and we have that, that is what's meaningful. And I feel like we spit in the faces of our ancestors when we say, "Oh, I have to have a house and I have to have this sort of level of income before I'm going to have children." And it's like they're popping out 10 kids that are our ancestors in a one-room log cabin, and it's like because they understood. They were a God-fearing people, and they understood that the first commandment God gave Adam and Eve after they left the garden was to multiply and replenish. And there's so much joy, and there's so much refinement that happens in the pursuit of being a parent that it is an absolute shame that our children are being lied to, that is somehow an inconvenience that should be put off until the last possible moment when the biological clock is ticking down and you're like, well, I guess I'll have a couple of them. Sorry for the rant, but it fires me up.
If you don't hate any, he likes his rants.
Well, it's also interesting. What you see in the world right now with masculinity and femininity is, you have this push on toxic masculinity. It's all toxic masculinity. And usually when you say masculinity, people just think toxic masculinity. That's what it is.
It's full buzzword now.
Yeah. Unless it's a masculine trait from a woman. Right? If a woman is giving masculine traits and expressing herself in a masculine way, it's praised. This is amazing. This is awesome. You're the one doing this. You look at Hollywood and all of the, excuse the French, badass women that are out there beating everybody up and blowing everything up. And it's like, even in video games, right? It's like, it's this raising of the masculinity in women and crushing the femininity. And then for men, it's crushing their masculinity and raising their femininity. It's like,
that's very true.
If you're a man and you express something masculine, it's toxic. But if it's feminine, you're getting in touch with your feminine side, right? And if you're a woman and you're feminine, you're weak. Yeah. So you should be expressing yourself with masculinity.
Yeah, and I think that what ends up happening is this. You go from the stark lines of the yin and yang, the masculine on one side, the feminine on the other, and then the adoption of each of those by each of them, right? Those are the little dots. You go from that stark black and white to a gray ball of nothingness, where it's not masculine, it's not feminine, because women will never be fully masculine and men will never be fully feminine. And so it's just this middle gray blob, no longer black and white. And I think the embodiment of that is the whole transgender movement, where it's like that is the embodiment of dispensing with the yin and yang, stark white, stark black, masculinity and femininity, right?
Yeah, in queer theory, that's what it is, right? I mean, it starts off saying we're going to separate gender from sex, and gender is how I express myself, and anybody can be a woman, and anybody can be a man. And yeah, biology's down here, but in the end, they really want to get rid of that too, right? They want to push that off and break it all down. And it's, I think there's something very divine about separation, right? Like you're talking about the yin and the yang. How do you, when you try and what I call flatten the hierarchy, when you make everything a one, right? One in the terms of being the same, you destroy several godlike attributes. For example, charity, right? The ability to love someone who is different from you, the ability to stretch yourself for that person. I mean, as your kids grow up and they develop their personalities, some of them aren't going to be like you at all, right? And so you're like, okay, I need to adapt to this. And if you're not in that situation, you may never do that, right? But the love is so strong, you're going to fill that gap, and you're going to reach out, and you're going to stretch yourself. And same with marriage, of course, right? I mean, when we hear in Genesis of, okay, man and woman are formed in the image of God, but they're separate. And that's that's the story of that Genesis, right? We're going to take the rib out. All they're saying is there's a separation. We need a distinct separation. And then becoming one is not becoming the same, right? It is that charity and that love and that ability to bridge between those differences and just going to our covenants with God. I mean, there's a massive difference between us and him. Mm-hmm. And what do you do? Why would he come down and lower himself to us?
Yeah.
Right. If he doesn't have that need, there's that love actually isn't there.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I love the yin and yang symbol so much, because it's not just a circle with a line straight down the middle, right? It's a wave that goes back and forth, meaning there has to be give. Like there is this almost dance that goes on between masculine and femininity in order to be one, because they aren't the same. And it is that makes them stronger. And then I love the dot of each of the colors in that yin and yang symbol, because I have adopted feminine traits from my wife that serve me as a masculine person, like those natural feminine traits. She has adopted some more natural masculine traits, and that makes us one person, but two separate individuals, right? And I think that we look at the hierarchy, because you talked about hierarchies. When you want to flatten the hierarchy, because it's not necessarily a hierarchy of value, right? Because you wouldn't say that a man is more valuable than a woman, or a woman more valuable.
No, I wouldn't say it's a values hierarchy, but I would say it's an order.
It's an order, right? And I think one of the phrases that really bothers me when I hear people say it, and I've even heard Savannah say, is "I'm just a mom." Like people ask, "Oh, so what do you do?" And you're like, "I'm just a mom," because that is actually a value hierarchy that is being bled into our system, that being just a mom is somehow lower than being what other thing you could be out in the world, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So. Yeah, I think that's right. And I think it's, and it's beautiful. And I have these two pictures, these two paintings. One of my favorite artists is this guy named Avramov, and Leonid Avramov. He's a Russian painter, and he's got these really bright strokes and really thick and short, bright strokes all over the place. And I've got these two paintings. It's the only thing I have put into our entire house. It's like, I get these two paintings. This is what I'm doing.
And the
guitar. Sure. But one of them is, it's a couple. And they're like in a park area, and the woman is looking up to the man. She's got her arms around his neck and she's kissing him, and she's got her leg up, right? It's a very feminine type thing and a very masculine type thing. It's like a romantic thing. But the other one is they're also kind of in a park walking, but they're walking down this road, and they've gone through a lot of the road, but so they're kind of small in the painting, but they're holding hands. And there's still a lot of road in front of them. So there's like this eternal perspective. And I think you need both. But one of the reasons I like it so much is I just feel that sanctity, that beauty of that yin and yang with man and woman is being lost. Right. And I just want that as a reminder in my home. It's like, no, this is what it's about, right? This has got to be front and center. And I've got some people comment sometimes that come into the room like, oh, what do you got that up there for? It's like, no, this is beautiful. This is an order. This is important, right?
I agree.
It really is the most important thing on earth. Like the most important thing that we can do as women is find a man who will be exalted with us. And how many people would be like, I would never believe that. That's so untrue. Like, girl power, like we were saying, like Hayden needs me in order to be exalted. I need him in order to be exalted.
Yes.
And so this focus on marriage needs to grow. The focus on, change yourself to become more like God, invite someone along on the path and do it together. Like it's no more of this, like, you don't need to change for somebody else. You don't need to, I don't know. I feel like I'm kind of tripping over my words, but there are so many things that I need to change about myself in order to be a better wife to my husband. And that's good. That is not an oppressed thing. That is not, Hayden has come so far in learning how to hold space for my emotions. And a lot of men would say like, well, just figure it out on your own, right? Like, what's my job here?
That's
like,
the natural default position.
Chaos,
Yes.
it's chaotic. Like, figure it out. But we need each other, and we need to figure out how to hold space for each other and how to grow in different. It looks different for every marriage and for every couple, right? But for us, like the masculine, the feminine have to come together with us, like learning how to change and. That's a good thing.
Yeah, and I think when you think what is the attribute of God, or what is the thing that God does that makes him God? And it's laid out in the very beginning of Genesis. It's to create. That is the crowning attribute that we give God at the very beginning of all religious text, is that he is able to create. And the most creative thing we can do as human beings is children. And that can only happen with a union between a man and a woman. And I think that, and we could get really deep into this, but when you read the Tanakh, or the Hebrew Bible in Hebrew, it is Elohim, right? Which is just plural for gods. So it just says the gods. And you have different names. You have El Elyon, which is like the Father God. You have El Shaddai, which is translated as the mighty God, but Shaddai literally means the breasts. So it's literally the God with breasts. And so what I'm saying is that it is Elohim that creates. It is the gods. And I submit, and us as Latter-day Saints submit, that is the divine masculine and the divine feminine working in tandem together in order to create. And that is the thing that we just can't get around. Biology speaks about it. Our theology speaks about it. And our society, when we ignore that fact that man and women are meant to be together and to work together, when we do that, our society falls apart. Our young men become violent and they become criminal. Our young women become promiscuous and unable to hold a long-term relationship. And that is the fault of us not being bound together in one flesh.
Yeah, I'm gonna set the stage on this question here first a little bit, because I'm interested to know. But I did a recent episode with my friend Bruce Porter, and it was I think I called it "What Happened to Exaltation," right? Something along those lines. And it's kind of like, okay, well, we don't seem to be teaching this as much in our ward houses, right, or in the stake. We still hear it in the pulpit from General Conference, but coming down, and I wonder if, part of that push away, not, or ignoring the topic has to do with these ideas and these ideologies that seem to be breaking the family apart. And so it's a little more uncomfortable maybe to talk about this because of the the cultural insertion of feminism, the cultural insertion of queer theory, the cultural insertion of untethered empathy, that we seem to be grabbing onto. Does that make sense?
Because salvation is an individual business, but exaltation is a family business.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think exaltation is a lot of pressure. Mm-hmm. And if we talk about exaltation in the wrong way, it turns into like teaching our youth, for example, you need to be perfect so you can live with God again. Like X equals Y. And if this is not accomplished, you're not going to receive this blessing. And that's not how it is. Like, I think so many of us were kind of taught that as kids, that like I said, X equals Y.
Well, there's no grit. Yeah, there's no grace.
There's no grace. And like, what's the point of Jesus if that's how it is, But it's not that. It's that who can we become? What are we learning in this life? What growth can we experience because of Jesus Christ, because of our weaknesses, because of our mistakes, because of repentance, right? Because Jesus is the one who comes in and changes us into an exalted being. But until we learn how to align our will with God's, that can't be possible. It's less of a focus on perfection equals exaltation that needs to be taught, and more of a focus on your relationship with Jesus Christ is the most important thing that needs to be cultivated in this life. And then listen to what he says. Because chances are Jesus Christ is going to tell you to have a celestial marriage because that's the way to exaltation, right? And so rather than, it's more of like what we need to be teaching is who are we listening to? Whose voice are we letting influence our decisions, our behavior, our families? Like we're saying, ultimately, the exaltation of my children and my husband and myself is the biggest priority that I should ever have in my whole life. And anything else, any career decisions, any where we live, where we buy a house, any decisions that we make are simply to support that, to support our family, to help our family to get closer to God.
Yeah. And do you feel that you get that instruction still? I would ask, do you hear about exaltation? Because here's what I think. I think that as you're saying this, Savannah, when exaltation is front and center, I think a couple things happen. Number one, you have a focus and a direction that you're going in. But number two, it's easier to see the difference in the other ideologies and the other cultural influences that don't align with that exaltation. If the gospel just becomes, just be a good person, right? Then it gets very fuzzy on what you're doing. But when you understand, I'm trying to become something specific, I'm trying to follow a certain path, and I have this goal of exaltation in place, and here's the direction I want to go, I think there's a lot more clarity. So when you drop that focus on exaltation, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. I still think that exaltation is not necessarily taught the right way. And it's because of the pressure that goes along with it. So like what you're saying, there needs to be clear direction on like, this is the path that God has laid out. And I wonder if maybe we shy away from it as like teaching in the church because we don't want people to get mad at us.
Our kids are anxious already. They already feel, and we have all these issues.
But causes mental illness.
Sure.
Yeah, that could be the excuses that we use. But at the end of the day, the reason why I think it is imperative, and when I teach, I don't think there's really a lesson I teach to my teachers in Teachers Quorum where I don't bring up exaltation, because it explains the why. Without exaltation, it's like, what is the point of all this? You have some arbitrary God that is putting arbitrary rules on us to make sure that we be nice to each other on earth. But like, what is the purpose? What is it turning us into? And I agree with you, Greg. I reposted that. You posted on your Instagram a while back, like, we are losing the doctrine exaltation, and I don't like that or whatever. And I reposted that because I feel the exact same way. It is the thing that sets us apart.
Yeah.
And if we don't, once again, the yin and yang, like if we don't see the brightness of the restored gospel and all of the doctrines that come with that against the dark background of the world and, some of the other, religious ideologies, then we're not going to value it. It's kind of like when I was, the easiest it was in my life to ever be righteous was when I was going through Marine Corps infantry training, and I was surrounded around guys that were not that. Like my language, I wasn't swearing. I held myself to a higher standard because I could see not only for myself what life is like and what my character may be like if I didn't have the standards that I had, but I also wanted to model that to those around me. And now, and that's one of the hard parts about Utah is you don't have that stark. You have this gray pool of lukewarm discipleship where, which I guess like right now because I think visually. And so to me, I look at the issues that we have with faith and looking the same as that of transgender ideology, right? It's the melding into a gray blob for both of them. You know what I mean? Where it's like you lose the starkness of each of them, and so then you end up throwing it out altogether.
Do you think that, it's an interesting point, do you think that there is at least more easily a loss of resiliency over adversity in the Intermountain West, where there is a large culture, it's almost all, because Savannah, you grew up in Illinois, very different, right? Hayden, you grew up in Salt Lake, right? Right. So those are very different environments for Latter-day Saints. I grew up in Orange County. It's like everyone knew I was a Mormon, right? It's like everybody knows that. There's already a narrative. There's a stigma. There's an understanding, right, from everybody that, oh, you're separate, you're different. Right. And so it's almost like you grow up expecting to fulfill that in some ways. Right. Do you think there's
peer pressure is probably more potent in Utah than it is outside for Latter-day Saints because of that reason of like, the kids in your high school growing up that were sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right, were probably not Latter-day Saints. The kids in my high school that were sex, drugs, and rock and roll were Latter-day Saints. And so the idea of like, there was this, when you're in that gray blob of what's right, what's wrong, what are we really, because we're all the same, it is a lot harder to differentiate yourself, and it's a lot harder to go up against peer pressure and like stand your ground. I agree with you. I think so.
Yeah, I think it's harder here. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, I think it's harder here.
Yeah.
So here's my call to the youth to figure out where you stand. Because it's not going to be easy and it's not going to be popular, but it's one of the most important things you can do to just decide. It's like, I laugh at my husband all the time because he makes these videos and posts them online of like super controversial things. And I'm like, do you not read some of these comments? And he's like, I don't care. Like, I stopped caring. And ultimately, that's what it is. We have to stop caring what the world thinks about us. And we have to just care so much more about truth, about living truth, and about just connecting with God and living our lives the way that he is asking us to, and learning how to listen to him so we know what that even means, right? So there has to be a divide.
You're talking about, before we were talking about, going against the grain, going against the world, these ideas and everything else. I used to think I use Lehi's dream as like a major anchor for many, many thought processes. And I used to think that, it's kind of silly, this whole idea of pointed fingers, because it never affected me that much. I to a fault am already in a position where I don't care what people think.
You're a stubborn dude.
It's like I never girl.
I just never cared, and it's just like, and I still don't. And to a fault, I'm too far that way, right? But I never got it until I became more an adult, had kids, and saw them go through their teenage years, and then the whole idea of the great and spacious building and the pointed fingers, and the way that is used in social media, for example, today, and these pressures and influences. It is maybe the primary deterrent to behavior, for good or bad, and usually bad.
It's nowadays it's bad, yeah. Under the guise of good.
Under the guise of good, sure.
Yeah, and that's what we're up against, is that we have to be willing to look like the bad guys and know that we are trying to be the good guys. You know what I mean? And that's where we have to be at, because that's exactly what Christ and his disciples were to those in Jerusalem. He was the bad guy. He was the one who was teaching people to break the Sabbath. He was not popular, and it wasn't because he was good and everyone else was bad. It was because everyone else was good and what he was doing was bad. And so we have to have the resilience within ourselves as husbands, fathers, wives, mothers, parents, to be okay with looking like the bad guys while we are trying to follow Christ.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Do you guys already, I know your kids are really young, do you, I'm guessing you already think about, how am I going to protect them? How are we going to watch out for this? Because things are just going to get worse and more confusing.
Yes, we do think about that often. And I think at the end of the day, we're just not going to outsource. And this is what happens. And I don't know when it happened. I don't know if this is how it's always been, but there are certain taboo subjects, right, that parents have a hard time or feel awkward sometimes talking about their kids with, sex being one of them. Here's the thing. When it comes to sex, when it comes to gender, when it comes to things like that. With pornography, stuff like that. My kids are going to learn about it somewhere. I want it to be from me and not from the world. Yeah. And so for us, as we think about just a general principle that is going to guide our parenting going in the future, and we're going to make mistakes and we're going to screw up, and we know that, it's that we are not going to be afraid to talk to our children. And we just want to have a culture of openness in our home. And, pornography is a big one. It's something that I struggled with through my teenage years all the way up, I struggled pretty hard with it until I was about 24. And then since we've been married, I've had a couple relapses. And the key to breaking that and making sure that doesn't get a hold in our lives is communication. And so like the relapses I've had in my marriage, the key to making sure that that doesn't continue is for me to communicate with my wife and to have that happen. So when my children come, and there is this thing too where, sorry, I'm kind of going on the pornography thing, but I find it interesting and important to probably a
major issue
that are listening. But a lot of times parents think that if they share their mistakes or their humanness with their children, it will somehow give them a card to go off and do whatever they want. But what I've found, and at least with my dad, is that isn't the case. That it just makes them trust you to talk to them.
Makes them approachable.
It makes them approachable.
If you're a kid, you're going to be so much more comfortable talking to your imperfect parent than your seemingly perfect parent, because they put off that vibe your whole childhood,
And I think as parents, our number one goal is to have good communication with our children, because if we don't have their ear, we don't have anything. We might be able to control their curfew. We might be able to control what clothes they wear while they're in our house. But if we don't have their ear and their respect, then none of it matters.
I think when it comes to protecting our kids, at least for me as a mom, this is something I've been thinking about a lot as we've been talking today, is just creating I don't want to say a safety net, but a
Garden of Eden.
A Garden of Eden. Creating that in my home, and I get to do that based on who I choose to bring into our home, right? And so when it comes to supporting each other as moms, and we talked about daycare earlier. Guys, motherhood is so hard, and sometimes it's truly impossible. It is always truly impossible to do all of it by yourself. And so why are we trying to do that? I just had a girlfriend come over yesterday to my house. She's got a little girl who's 2, and all the kids were running around in their underwear, just playing in the water table outside. And my house was a mess. I had just gotten out of the shower, and I just had to be like, this is so great. Like, there is no perfection here. There is no like stress of I have to look a certain way as a mom before I can let people come into our world. And so I'm trying on purpose to build this network and this family of people that my children can know, who are also like safe people, who are going to help teach them about the gospel, and who are going to help, like, in no way am I trying to cocoon my children from people who don't see things the same way that I do. But it is my responsibility as a mom to find people who I can serve and help, and who are willing to come serve and help me and my kids. And so moms, like, text that other mom that you've been thinking about this week. Like, don't worry about if your kid's in their underwear. Like, we all just need each other. And the more support we can give each other as moms, as parents, as people who care about the exaltation of our families, the easier it's going to be. And the more joyful it's going to be, the less terrifying the world is going to seem, because we know we have this space of safety and of truth, and of like, we can all hold space for each other with our imperfections and with our struggles, and with me crying about my therapy appointment to my friend yesterday. Like, we all need that, and we're all so afraid, I think, to do that in the name of looking perfect on social media, right? So that was a total tangent that just went off to a completely different direction. But I think it's very, very, very important, especially as young moms. We need each other, and our kids need each other. The end.
Yeah, to both of those points, I think that we no longer live in a world where you can protect your kid from everything.
Right.
Right. You used to be able to do that a lot easier. That's just not the case anymore.
It's also not helpful. Like,
no.
It's not helpful to try and shelter your kid from everything.
No, especially because as soon as they walk out into the world, how are they going to handle anything? That's
exactly.
one thing. Right. There's no resiliency that's built up.
There has to be a recognition that you're going to build a garden, but there's always going to be a snake. Mm-hmm. Living in denial of the serpent in the garden is only dangerous for your family. And so recognizing and being okay with the fact that there's always going to be a serpent in the garden is important. But I think, as Savannah, was saying, my job as a man is to build a wall for the garden. Her job as mother is to tend that garden,
fill the garden.
And to fill the garden with children, with our own Adam and Eves, until one day they partake of the fruit of good and evil, understand they're conscious beings, and then they go out in the world and they do the same thing.
And then they want to return. Mm-hmm. And then they have a place where they want to come back to, knowing that this is a place where we are close to God, and ultimately, isn't that the whole metaphor, that we all left the garden, we all left our heavenly home, and that someday we hope to want to go back, right?
Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's good stuff. I appreciate both of you guys. I think that the 6 months that you guys had in your courtship was more than enough. You're a great couple.
Oh, no, you exposed us. We're one of those couples.
It was immediately followed, though, with 6 months of Marine Corps training away from each other.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then 9 months after that, we had our first child. So it's been a wild ride.
Yeah, that's pretty close to my timeline as well. So, but anyway, thank you so much. You guys have both got a great spirit, so much clarity. You articulate yourselves very well, and appreciate your input.
God bless you.
Craig.